What if the most trusted Bible study group in your neighborhood is actually a $54 billion real estate empire? What if their famous door-to-door preaching is not about saving souls, but about keeping members too busy to ask hard questions? And what if the organization that claims to speak for God secretly collaborated with the United Nations, the very beast it preaches against? The truth behind Jehovah's Witnesses is more shocking than you ever imagined. We've uncovered the evidence. Now, we're sharing it. After Russell died in 1916, a lawyer named Joseph Rutherford grabbed power. He wasn't a spiritual man. He was a political tactician. He purged anyone who might challenge him and rewrote the group's entire structure. Then he built a mansion in San Diego. 10 bedrooms. Spanish colonial architecture. Prime real estate. He called it Beth Sarim, House of the Princes. Why princes? Because Rutherford taught that Old Testament heroes like Abraham, David, and Moses would soon be resurrected on earth and would need a proper place to live. So he built them a mansion. The deed was legally recorded in trust for David, king of Israel. The prophets never showed up. Rutherford lived there himself until his death in 1942. The organization quietly sold the property years later. They have never apologized to the members who donated money during the Great Depression to build a house for a ghost. That was just the beginning of the leadership's double standards. Next came a secret alliance with the very beast they preached against. By the 1930s, Rutherford had renamed the group Jehovah's Witnesses and turned door-to-door preaching into a mandatory activity. He also taught that the United Nations was their image of the wild beast, a satanic entity that true Christians must reject. But here's what members never learned. From 1991 to 2001, the Watchtower was secretly registered as a UN NGO, a non-governmental organization. They attended meetings. They gained access. They collaborated with the very beast they condemned from their platforms. The day a journalist exposed the affiliation, the Watchtower withdrew its membership within hours. No explanation was given to the millions of witnesses who had trusted them. When researchers later asked for records, the organization refused. When former members raised questions, they were labeled apostates. Their message was clear: the leadership can work with Satan's beast, but you cannot ask why. While the leadership hobnobbed with the UN, ordinary witnesses were selling their homes for prophecy that would never come true. The year was 1975. The Watchtower had been building expectation for years. Frederick Franz, a top leader, hinted that Armageddon would come by October. Members got the message. Across the world, families sold their houses, quit their jobs, pulled their children out of school. In Nigeria, thousands took out massive loans they could never repay. In the United States, parents stopped saving for college. In Europe, couples postponed having children. One former witness named Charles Thompson remembers his father selling the family apartment in Chicago. They moved to a rented room with a leaking ceiling. They slept on mattresses on the floor, waiting for angels. October 15, 1975 came. It rained. Nothing happened. The organization didn't apologize. Instead, leaders quietly adjusted the teaching. The date had been right, they said, but members were overeager. The blame was shifted from the leadership to the victims. The damage was catastrophic. More than 300,000 people left. And the Watchtower did something unexpected with the money. In the aftermath of 1975, while former witnesses struggled to rebuild their lives, the Watchtower began a massive real estate buying spree. The same year families were being evicted, the organization purchased a 15-story building in Brooklyn for nearly $2 million. Today, the Watchtower's global property portfolio is estimated at between $30 billion and $52 billion. They have sold nearly $2.5 billion in real estate since 2004 alone. Much of that land was originally bought with donated money and volunteer labor. Kingdom halls are built by members, for free, then sold for profit. The cycle repeats. The organization is now one of the largest property holders in New York's Brooklyn Heights. They have created secretive financial entities in Ireland to manage their wealth. None of this is disclosed to the average witness, who is told to trust the faithful slave. But the real horror isn't the money. It's what the organization does to children. For decades, Jehovah's Witnesses have maintained a policy called the two-witness rule. It states that no disciplinary action can be taken against an accused person unless two eyewitnesses saw the same act. In cases of child sexual abuse, there are almost never two eyewitnesses. So the abuser stays. The victim is often told to forgive and forget. If a family reports the abuse to police, they can be disfellowshipped for bringing reproach on the organization. In 1989, the Watchtower sent a confidential letter to all congregations. It instructed elders not to report abuse to secular authorities. Keep it internal. Protect the name. William Bowen, a former elder, was part of that administration. He later wrote, "I realized I was part of the problem, creating a pedophile paradise where men could molest children and get away with it using the rules of the church." He founded Silent Lambs, an organization that has collected hundreds of survivor testimonies. The Watchtower has responded by sending subpoenas to force Google and Reddit to reveal the identities of anonymous critics. Mini cliffhanger: courts around the world are finally pushing back. The results are devastating. In 2025, a jury in Montana awarded a survivor $35 million in damages. The Watchtower had knowingly allowed a convicted child abuser to remain in the congregation. They had transferred him from one congregation to another without warning parents. In New Zealand, a royal commission dismissed 17 separate legal challenges filed by the Watchtower to block investigations into historical abuse. The commission concluded that the organization's policies actively enabled the concealment of child sexual abuse. In Australia, after a decade of investigations, only 2 Jehovah's Witness survivors have received compensation from a government redress scheme. The organization fought every application. Meanwhile, in March 2026, the governing body announced that using your own blood in surgery is now a personal decision. After 75 years of teaching that this was a sin against God, they admitted, the Bible does not comment on this practice. If a 75-year, absolute truth, can become a matter of conscience overnight, what other rules are just administrative preferences? The man who saw it all from the inside was Raymond Franz. He served on the governing body for a decade. He was at the highest level. And what he found shocked him. He discovered that doctrines affecting 8 million people were not revealed by God. They were voted on by a small group of men, requiring a 2/3 majority to pass. The Bible was rarely consulted, he wrote. It was mainly a matter of discussing organizational policy. He tried to raise concerns. He was removed from the governing body, then disfellowshipped. He wrote Crisis of Conscience, a book the Watchtower has banned and burned. Copies still circulate among ex-members. Franz died in 2010. But his question remains, if the leaders who claim to speak for God can vote on doctrine like a corporate board, how can any member be sure any teaching is true? The untold history of Jehovah's Witnesses is not a story of faith. It is a story of control, secrecy, and money. A system that demands absolute loyalty and offers only silence in return. The organization is still powerful, still wealthy, still knocking on doors. But the cracks are showing. And the truth, the real, documented, undeniable truth, is finally coming through. Next time you see 2 neatly dressed people at your door, don't argue theology. Just ask one question: why won't your leaders let you read Raymond Franz's book?